They were here first, not in the way we understand first, not as some prosaic opening chapter in a textbook with dates and footnotes, but as a presence that folded into the world like fire into dark cloth, ancient, restless, and incandescent in ways that never belonged to the cool, slow pulse of flesh. The lore lays it out in handfuls and fragments, scriptural verses, stray hadiths, folklore told, beside lamps, and the old men who still lower their voices when the subject comes up. Pull those fragments together, and a panorama opens. A prehistory of the world, not of humans, but of beings who moved across the earth in a manner both tangible and impossible. They are named Jinn, Genii, Djinn, depending on tongue, but none of those translations quite grips the fullness of them. To call them simply spirits is to miss their cunning, their kingdoms, their markets, their infidelities, their griefs. They are not immaterial in the sense of mere thought. They have appetites, alliances, and architectures. They make cities that shimmer into being beneath desert moons and vanish under the sunrise. They fight wars that stain the skies a color soldiers cannot name. They make art of lightning and counsel of shadow. They fall in love and in hate. They plot, and sometimes they repent. This is the story the old storytellers press into the listener's palms. Not merely myth, not merely scripture, but a living memory, an account of a race that ruled the earth in ages older than any human memory, and whose fall became the very scaffolding upon which humanity's destiny was built. The origin of the jinn, as tradition whispers it, is elemental. There are many ways to tell the genesis, and each teller favors a different contour. Some speak with the measured reverence of a scholar. The jinn were fashioned of smokeless fire, a phrase that suggests something beyond mere flame, a luminous stuff that neither smokes nor smolders, but moves like a thought, stinging and swift. Others give more colorful metaphors, that they were born of lightning, trapped in the throat of storms, or of embers stolen from the first sunrise, or of the breathless quiet before the first sea heard itself. None of these metaphors is wrong. They are languages trying to map what cannot be held. What matters is that the jinn's birth predates the human. They wake early in the world's story, already animated, already aware. They inherit landscapes in the way a person inherits a house, with privilege, with entitlement, with the naive confidence of those who never had to fight for what they already had. They travel like wind, and yet can be anchored to place. They slide through rock, and yet build towers of moon iron. They are covetous and ingenious, capable of weaving illusions that trap the most cautious traveler in an endless bazaar. At first, their numbers are small, a scattering of clans and individuals who stake claims to islands of air and dune. Over time, those clans knit into patrilines and dynasties. They name rivers. They mark the world with runes and inscriptions that vanish from a human eye, yet remain seared into the bones of the land. They develop speech, tongues layered with whispers and thunder. They make pacts, oaths formed of smoke and oath sparks. They worship in their own ways, a sky god for one tribe, an exhortation to chaos for another. They keep histories, long and winding, about kings and betrayals and the hunger of their own kind. And then, because no story worth the telling lacks a turning, they change. Time for the jinn is both expanse and pressure. It gives them lifetimes that stretch like the cat's desert horizon, but it also accumulates slights, grudges, and ambitions. Where humans might be tempted by immediate pleasures, the jinn are tempted by grand designs. Empires do not form out of nothing, they form out of pride. A minor lord conquers a neighboring clan not for food or territory, but to possess a particular wind that howls at midnight. A queen will unleash a plague of locust light across a valley to break a rival's power. Consider a species with memory that is nearly endless. Their vendettas do not die with an individual. Family histories are long plumages wound tight around hearts. If humans make the occasional destructive decision, the jinn do so with the measured cold of generations recalibrated to exacting fury. Their golden age, if one insists on such an anthropocentric phrase, is a period of ornate cruelty and brilliant creation. Think of soaring citadels carved of black glass and salt, whose walls hum like deceased bees. Think of markets that sell bottled storms or laughter, where you may buy the favor of a star. Think of academies where jinn philosophers debate the ontologies of light and how to bend the skeletons of mountains into gardens. You might imagine them as an otherworldly Venice, whose canals whisper in a language that mutters secrets, or as a Babylon, whose ziggurats reach like questions into the sky. Their art is fierce, their architecture defiant. That very grandeur becomes the root of their undoing. Pride, beautifully dressed, is a poor negotiator with the laws that govern the cosmos. As they grow, so does their corruption. Decadence among rulers, the cruel betrothals of politics, looting of the natural sanctuaries upon which even other jinn depend. Some jinn become worshippers of raw power, of the idea that might justifies dominion. The notion of obedience becomes a word contested in markets and courtrooms. The spiritual geometry of the world starts to tilt. In many of the oldest accounts, a singular figure emerges at the center of the turning, a name that echoes across traditions, sometimes as a rebel, sometimes as a tempter, sometimes as a prince who refused to bow. He is not always called the same thing. Names shift with dialects, but his presence is consistent. A towering mind that refused what it perceived as improper subservience. A leader who galvanized the discontented into a force that would challenge the heavens. In some tellings, he is a philosopher king. In others, a general who wears arrogance like a crown. To the jinn that followed him, he offered a vision, not merely power, but a way to rewrite their place in the cosmos. This leader's revolt is the first great fissure in jinn society. It divides them into camps: the obedient, those who held to piety, restraint, and the fear of the moral order, and the world rebellious, those intoxicated by autonomy, by the idea that no being should be commanded. The conflict is not merely political, but cosmic. It is an argument about the nature of submission, a question that would later be inscribed into human theological debate. Where the obedient jinn sought harmony with the cosmos, the rebels sought to remake the cosmos according to their will. Wars follow. Skirmishes, escalated wars follow. Skirmishes escalated by grudges older than any sun. These are not quick conflicts. They are sieges that last years, seasons of attrition, where entire oases are turned into battlefields, where the sky learns to bruise from the shock of their collision. The most vivid accounts describe battles that reshape the land. Mountains cracked wide as fists, forests reduced to glass. Angels, if we are to believe the older scriptures and the later pious recollections, are sometimes sent as agents of correction. They come not as undifferentiated forces, but as a calibrated response, acting as custodians of a moral machine that will not allow a species to devour the world it inhabits. Whether the angels came because the jinn demanded correction, or because cosmic law demanded balance, the result is cataclysmic. Cities once shimmering fall into ruin. Armies of the jinn, rebellious, are scattered across the horizon. Some survivors flee into hidden caverns. Others are cast into forms that no one would have thought possible. The voice of the leader grows defiant, to the end, pronounced as both a refusal and a prophecy. His fall is not simple. It is filled with rhetorical flourishes, with promises that his followers would never be forgotten and that their resentment would reverberate. And then, after the smoke settles, the earth is cleared. Into the space made by that clearing, a new chapter begins. Human beings are made and set upon the earth. The jinn's dominion recedes, not entirely erased, but rearranged. Some jinn take on a posture of hiding, others sleep. A few seek reconciliation, but the memory of grievance is like a coal that never goes out. The story says that we, humans, arrive to inherit an earth with edges already singed by that earlier civilization. We inherit ruins, inscriptions, the taste of certain winds. We step into a world already shaped by other wills, and our own presence becomes entangled with that older, scarred history. Stories that want to make you feel something: fear, awe, dread, longing. Do not simply recount events. They enter the interior lives of their players. To understand how the jinn could have ruled an earth while still being a thing that could be unmade, we must imagine them as beings with psychology, with private shame and small, human-seeming tenderness. Take the notion of memory. A human's memory is typically bounded, a life between birth and death. A jinn's memory spills like a river through cliff faces. The past remains vivid and pressing for them. This means that old hurts are not merely remembered, they shape decisions as if they occurred yesterday. A slight from a rival a century ago might be called upon as the justification for plundering a city today. This is not simply vindictiveness, but a culture whose timing is different, what we call obsession. They call continuity. Because of this continuity, family honor is a religion unto itself. A clan's disgrace can propagate for generations. Blood debts become dynastic projects. Imagine dynasties that keep court records of slights, lists of insults, marriages that were refused, the names of those who cursed them. In such a society, emperors emerge whose policies are honestly cruel. They are pragmatists who think in terms of stabilizing the cascade of vendettas into manageable canals. If you could step into a court of a jinn king, you would see advisors whose faces are carved with caution, whose advice is delivered like currency. A king's greatest talent is not battle, but timing. To know when to repay a debt and when to forgive it, so that the balance sheet of hatred does not tip into irreversible collapse. And yet, for all this calculation, there is vulnerability, especially in their capacity for wonder. Many accounts emphasize that jinn are capable of astonishment in a way human adults forget. They worship beauty and fear ugliness. They make music by coaxing the sand to sing, and hold festivals where the stars themselves are invited to dance. Their grief can be exquisite, an entire city mourning the death of a scholar, as though the light itself were injured, composing elegies that run like rivers, tiring the night with verse. These contradictions, an appetite for both cruelty and refinement, make their fall especially tragic. They are not simply villains, they are a civilization with virtues as well as vices. Their downfall at the hands of their own hubris becomes an indictment of power's ability to rot even the most cultivated souls. In the end, it is less about divine wrath than the self-consumption of creatures, an interior that cannot reconcile desire with restraint. The leader, a figure of myths, is often shown as tragic in private, if monstrous in public. A king who refuses to bow may, in quieter tales, be shown weeping over a small thing, the splintering of a friendship, the betrayal of a trusted companion. This humanizes him and makes his defiance more complex. He refuses precisely because he fears the loss of self that demands obedience. In his mind, obedience is tantamount to erasure. He will rather be the architect of his own ruin than submit to a cosmology he does not accept. His rhetoric is mesmerizing because it speaks to a deep, dangerous human longing to be utterly free of bounds. That longing, given the cognitive and temporal resources of a jinn, becomes a dynamite capable of bringing whole mountain ranges down. The collapse is not simply external. Inside the jinn cities, despair takes forms that are intimate and quiet. There are poems about lovers who cannot touch one another without burning. There are tales of scholars who, having witnessed the arrogance of kings, take to the deserts in penitent solitude and teach a new ethic of restraint. There are also rioters who feel abandoned by the pious and turn to violence. These personal narratives intertwine until the social fabric frays, and so the cosmic response comes like an inevitability, not as a gratuitous punishment, but as a corrective calculus, a rebalancing. Angels, if one follows scriptural threads, act as the hand of that correction. Their intervention is often portrayed as surgical, a removal of malignant cells. The earth, which the jinn had reshaped to fit their appetites, is returned to a state more hospitable for what will come next. The imagery in such tales is not merely of annihilation, but of grief, cleansing. Fountains that once spouted blood are washed clear, stones rearranged into orderly rows so that the land-bearing seed might find purchase. After the dust settles, the jinn are dispersed. Their power broken, they retreat into autonomies. Margins. Some vanish from the earth entirely. Others withdraw to secret caverns, beneath cities, into voids where the sun barely reaches. A few integrate, learning to walk the world in quieter ways. The proud leader survives in some accounts, wounded, transformed, banished, not dead. This survival becomes the compress of later temptation, a presence that will continue to whisper to the hearts of those who would listen, promising autonomy at the price of submission. For humans who inherit a world marked by a previous sovereignty, meaning does not come easy. Imagine stepping into a ruined capital, columns carved with demands in a script you cannot read, markets of strange architecture where no one now sells bottled laughter, a palace roof where mosaics depict creatures who do not belong to any known species. How would you tell the story of your own arrival in a place already coded by other wills? Would you feel like an inheritor or an intruder? This is the existential question that pervades the human jinn encounter. The lore suggests wealth of encounters, places haunted by half-remembered laws, recesses where the old forms of government endure in shadow. Humans living near certain ruins report dreams that are not their own, dreams of bargains, of doors opening to thresholds where one can barter for knowledge. The old men of villages near such sites warn that to pry is to risk awakening something. Scholars meanwhile caution against conflating poetic tradition with natural history. They remind listeners that what survives are stories, not literal archives. Yet superstition and lived experience often collude. There are such narratives: shepherds who find a stream gushing amber, only to return the next day and find the bed dry; travelers who pass through a canyon and feel their shadows detach and move of their own accord; newborns with markings that elders say are signs of jinn guardians. These are the threads that stitch together the persistent belief that the jinn never entirely abandoned the world. They reside in places of liminality, the edges of deserts, the ruins of temples, high mountain passes, and they are happiest where human attention is thin. The theological strands are not monolithic. In Islamic tradition, there is an acknowledgement of jinn as part of creation, beings endowed with will, accountable, and capable of belief. But there is also caution in how one invokes them, references to the proper observance of rites, the crowns, dangers of dabbling. Religious scholars across centuries have spoken with varying tones, some stressing the very real danger of these beings, others meditating on the moral lessons their stories encode about humility, obedience, and the hazards of pride. This tension is fertile for storytelling. It gives the tale both terror and moral texture. A video or narrative can move between the cosmic and the intimate by showing how the jinn linger in the grooves of human life. The sudden gust that knocks a lamp over in the old house, the debt, inexplicable anxiety at the center of a family, the berserk joy of a child who seems to play with nothing and yet is smiling at something that adults cannot see. These are the small evidences that keep the jinn alive in human imagination. There are also the darker encounters, possessions, malformations, people whose lives are unraveled by dealings with beings whose mind operates at a different pitch, but the cultural responses vary. In certain traditions, humility, prayer, and ritual offer protection. In others, clever bargaining and the offering of food and respect keep jinn placated. The negotiation is as medieval as it is modern. People across centuries have left milk and bread by wells, have built small shrines, have learned rituals to put restless spirits to rest. This is not purely superstition. It is a social technology, a way communities manage the unexplained by creating norms around them. For storytellers, the hybrid space between jurisprudence and folk practice is gold. It provides plot devices. A ritual misperformed becomes a tragic pivot. Character motivations, a protagonist bent on learning forbidden jinn lore to restore a lost family name, and tonal contrasts, the pious versus the querulous skeptic. It also provides a scaffold upon which to attach human psychology, grief that seeks answers in the metaphysical, the desire for meaning in the face of ruin, the seduction of knowledge that costs more than it promises. But perhaps the most compelling human angle is this: even after millennia, the jinn remain a prism through which humans can see themselves. In some stories, human characters are mirror images of their predecessors. Are we too on the path to arrogance? Can the hubris that felled the jinn be seen in the same patterns that terrify us today? By framing the jinn's story as a pen, cautionary mirror, storytellers can make the myth relevant. The cosmos does not punish arbitrarily, it responds to repeated patterns. The jinn's fall was a reaction to their choices that when viewed historically, feel all too human. What of the jinn today, in our cities and gadgets and modern life? The old narratives persist in new forms. Urban legends morph into smartphone accounts. People claim contact through apps and in chat rooms. The old method, leaving milk at a well, becomes repurposed. Someone posts at 2 a.m. about being wooed by a voice through a video call no one can trace. There is, in many ways, a technological echo of ancient avenues for influence. The ability to whisper across distances, so prized by the jinn, now can seem like a new instrument for their ancient talents. A modern storyteller might exploit these analogies. Jinn, who once traded in storms, now trade in virality. They are allegory and actuality both. A character in a modern drama could be haunted by a character in a modern drama could be haunted by a trending meme, a viral image that seems to call to something inside the viewer. Promising elevation. The parallel is clean. Ancient temptation once promised power. Modern temptation offers fame. The substrate has changed, but the human response, wanting to be seen, to be above the crowd, remains. There is also the darker possibility, one that many religious voices warn against, that those who attempt to harness jinn power for selfish ends invite catastrophic miscalculations. The jinn do not operate under human law. A bargain made casually can have consequences magnified across generations. The temptation to use them as instruments for revenge, for wealth, for political advantage is a recurring chord in folklore. We hear it in stories, a warlord who allied with jinn to win a battle, only to find his throne haunted by the screaming of the vanquished. A thief who makes a cupped deal with a jinn to evade capture, only to lose memory of what they matters. A politician whose midnight negotiations with a shadow broker leave his soul hollow. These are morality plays, yes, but they also produce a philosophical question about agency and coercion. To what extent are we the masters of the tools we use? The jinn, for their part, are not the same as weapons or apps. They are fellow agents, sometimes knowledgeable and benevolent, other times mischievous or malicious. Our modern age, with its technologies of influence and attention, might be uniquely vulnerable to the humbler analogues of jinn seduction. The warning is not merely about supernatural beings, but about structural systems that mimic their mischief. Ecosystems of surface-level engagement that erode the inner life. Yet, there are also hopeful narratives. Some contemporary storytellers and spiritual practitioners depict jinn as capable of goodness, companions or guardians who, when treated with respect, offer wisdom. They remind audiences that the jinn are not monolithically malevolent. The older, more complex traditions emphasize balance. Treat the jinn with humility, respect the covenantal structures of the world, and do not seek dominion that strips others of agency. What, then, is retained from the jinn's ancient dominion as we walk through our modern cities? The answer is not a list of supernatural residues, but a set of questions lodged in the human heart. The jinn story is a parable of power, of how any species, creature, civilization, or technological substrate can become a predator upon the very world it seeks to shape. More technologically or morally sophisticated a society becomes, the more perilously close it can come to eroding the conditions of life for itself and others. The jinn serve as a mythic archive for these warnings. Their myths say, attainments unmoored from humility become instruments of ruin. The corrective, when delivered by angels or converging moral balance, reshapes destiny. But then a more unsettling idea hangs, like smoke in the lungs. The correction does not erase memory. The ashes of a civilization are fertile. They tell stories. Those stories haunt future generations. They are the sedimentary layers beneath our own moral geographies. A cinematic treatment that wants to blow up, to capture wide attention, would not only dramatize these cosmic stakes, it would embed them in human faces. The scholar who burns his tablet is recognizably like the scientist whose curiosity becomes harmful. The mother bargaining away her child mirrors the modern parent sacrificing their children's privacy for social rest. Capital, the last king whose pride undoes him resembles leaders whose calculus sacrifices tomorrow for the short victory of today. This is why the Jinn's prehistory is so potent as content. It is simultaneously exotic and intimately pertinent. It offers spectacle, the ruins, the battles, the wonders, and it offers instruction, a mirror held to the present that asks whether we are any better at tempering power than those before us. If I must leave you with a final image, a final mood to haunt the reader, let it be this. Imagine a night beneath a sky that should be purely dark, but is instead threaded with a faint, irregular luminescence. You stand at the edge of an old ruin where children no longer play. Wind moves like a living thing, carrying with it the smell of iron and jasmine. There is a stone with a glyph you do not recognize. You reach out and put your hand on it. The glyph is warm. For a moment, you sense a pulse, not simply the pulse of your blood, but the echo of a memory that is older than your language. It is not an accusation, but a question. Will you be like them? The Jinn who lived before humanity were not monsters. They were a civilization with choices. You and I live in the shadow of those choices. Their legacy is not just in ruins or stories, but in the moral textures of our own decisions. The myth ends not with closure, but with an open proposition. The past speaks to the present through the bodies and structures we inherit. The Jinn's story offers us a chance to listen, to learn, and perhaps to avoid repeating the forms of arrogance that swallowed another age. And if myths are the world's older kind of truth, then this one, of incandescent beings who once ruled and then fell, is true in its own necessary sense. It reveals not merely what might have been, but what might yet be. A future where any creature, including us, can either learn from the ledger of ruin or add to it. The choice, it seems, was given then, and it is given again.